Greetings, and welcome to A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. For this project, we are using the Ivan Walters reference book of 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Each day, we watch a movie associated with the date we are watching it on.
And as it is the 6th of August, we are going to be watching Above and Beyond from 1952, directed by Melvin Frank and Norman Panama, and starring Robert Taylor. So as it is with this list of movies, it keeps bringing me back to a lot of historical moments, especially when it comes to wartime throughout history. And this movie is no exception to this rule. However, until the actual watching of this movie, I had no idea what this movie was or what this was about. So definitely was a first time watch. And like I already mentioned, not only does this movie star Robert Taylor, but it also stars Eleanor Parker, James Whitmore, Larry Keating, Larry Gates, and Marilyn Erskine. Colonel Paul Tibbets, played by Robert Taylor, commander of the 509th Composite Group during World War II, struggles to come to grips with his particular place in human history. He's the first man ever to drop the atomic bomb, while his wife Lucy, played by Eleanor Parker, has stayed loyal to him. The aftermath of causing such destruction leaves Paul questioning his humanity and the mission that may have forever diminished it. So as this movie is set in history as basically the bombing of Hiroshima, we basically don't have that as the forefront of our story. It's actually pretty much the relationship between a husband and wife that becomes really strained over the amount of time that Paul spends working on his military systems, and how Lucy herself is the stay-at-home mother. Now, while it was the thing to do at the time, there was a situation where the men were in isolation and families were brought in. It was suggested that his wife not be brought in because she would be too much a distraction for him. So there's a lot more drama that goes into the storyline than really what should be the center of it, which is the mission to build the A-bomb and drop it on a Japanese location. Now, of course, throughout this movie, that is what happens. It's Tibbets working on this mission, getting the right men, experimenting with the different planes, including the refitting and reconstruction of B-29s to be able to become this bomber that can travel quite a distance. One other thing that is of note is a good portion of this movie is voiceovered by actually Lucy Tibbets herself as a reflection of what happens. Basically, the movie starts at the end of our story and it's told mostly in flashbacks, or actually jumps back in time and then comes up to the present day technically. But she basically comments as filler between jumping in time periods throughout their relationship and his military career. And like I said, while this movie is centered around the A-bomb on Hiroshima, that actually takes place on the anniversary of today's date, which is the 6th of August in 1945. And that happens about an hour and 42 minutes into this 2 hour and 2 minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up getting nominated for Best Screenplay and Best Original Score. And as it is the 7th of August, we will be watching Gallipoli from 1981, directed by Peter Weir and starring Mark Lee. So I've seen this movie popping up on wartime movies all the time, and knowing that it is a early 80s Australian film. Other than that, the fact that it's an early Mel Gibson movie as well is probably the only thing I really knew about this movie. That being said, this was definitely my first time watching this movie. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star Mark Lee, but it also stars Bill Kerr, Harold Hopkins, Charles Yannick-Pingu, Heath Harris, Ron Grain, and Mel Gibson. Archie and Frank, played by Mark Lee and Mel Gibson are two young Australian sprinters who want to join the army to fulfill their sense of duty. Turned down because they are too young, the pair hop a freight train to Perth, where they are allowed to join up. They board a troop ship heading to Cairo, and after training in the shadows of the Great Pyramids, the boys finally are sent to the front line, where their speed makes them candidates for messengers in one of the war's bloodiest battles. So, as I've gotten used to the biographies and sports movies and the plethora of war films that this list has brought me, this is one that had probably in the back of my subconscious always like, I keep seeing this movie's title, might as well eventually get around to seeing it. Now that I have, I'm glad I did for this project, but I don't really see what the big deal is about. I mean, I understand we're dealing with a growing film industry in Australia. We have some great patriot moments towards Australia and all that. So I have nothing against Australia and all that. It is during a very tumultuous time in the history and like the early 1900s, like 1915 and all that. And the war that they're involved with really isn't, it's a war. Wars ultimately are not the greatest things to be reflective of the human race. But I will admit, seeing this young Mark Lee and a young Mel Gibson, they are very charming on screen. They shine very brightly in this movie. Again, we're dealing with going through not only for the running, as we start off with Mark Lee's Archie Hamilton character as he trains to become a great sprinter, and eventually meeting up with Frank Dune, which is Mel Gibson later on. The two of them becoming buddy-buddy because of their ability to run really fast. The idea behind the movie is being like sort of an anti-war sort of a look upon the experience that these characters are going through. And it's definitely something that is most forward when you're actually watching this. You do realize that this is probably the last thing that should be happening, and it should be a final thing to do instead of a very first thing, which is what we figure out through this, is that this is like their first confrontation, that's go to war sort of thing. But that being said, it's a well worth the watch, I will admit. It is kind of cool to see the era and the culture of Australia coming forward through this, and it's definitely not a waste of the time that I had watched the movie, unlike some movies on this list that I've run into that are just like a slog to walk through. Again, it also might be that whole entire youthful acting, because it's still Australian voices coming through to a North American audience was still at the time a very newish thing. So it's a big monumental moment within this movie that on the 7th of August 1915 is when Major Barton, played by Bill Hunter, charges Archie to be the runner for the regimental commander. And at one point, the third charge is canceled, and because of downed radio lines, it is basically a race between life and death for Frank as one of the other runners to relay the information. And that happens at 1 hour and 33 minutes into this 1 hour and 50-minute movie. And as it is the 8th of August, we are going to be watching Buster from 1988, directed by David Green and starring Phil Collins. So until I actually saw this movie on this list, I had always thought that this was some sort of like romantic comedy, period piece maybe sort of thing, that like a small-time crook sort of storyline trying to like turn his life around sort of situation with Phil Collins as the lead. It wasn't until I started watching the actual movie to realize, oh, this is a much bigger story than what I had thought it already was. So, that being said, this would be a first time watch for me. And like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Phil Collins, but it also stars Julie Walters, Larry Lamb, Stephanie Lawrence, Ellie Beavan, Ralph Brown, and Martin Jarvis. The story of great train robber Buster Edwards, played by Phil Collins, a small timer who fell in with a more ambitious thieves. After the gang robs a London to Glasgow Royal Mail train in 1963, he takes his family, including his wife, played by Julie Walters, into hiding in Mexico, but finds that the money is no substitute for life back home. So it's one of those, small-time thief turns into big-time bank robber type movies that you see all the time. This, again, based on true facts that I didn't realize that was the actual real-life event until I started watching the movie. It turned out to be quite more entertaining than I actually had thought. I got caught up early in the movie when there was a fantastically shot scene that with one camera in several different takes with the camera in different angles and all that sort of thing. It's a wonderful little experiment to break down and watch the scene. I actually did literally stop the movie and rewind the scene like 3 times to see, okay, the camera is like handheld at this point. Oh, here it is locked onto the rotating merry-go-round that these guys are sitting on, like one of those little park merry-go-rounds the kids like hold onto the side and run around and spin it, not an actual one where you're riding horses and all that. And they're having this conversation between 3 people, and there's a camera like shooting them from different angles and different shots, and it's just fascinating how just something that simple caught my eye. But the heist itself is really cool. But it's the main part of the story is the group of men who commit the crime trying to keep ahead of the law. And pretty much everyone but Buster ends up getting caught. He takes his family, goes on a long-distance trip to Mexico. The wife eventually gets tired of the situation and then moves back home, and then he realizes that he misses her and then decides to go back home with her. Now, while there isn't much more to that, it is a very interesting movie to watch because, first of all, Phil Collins does a fantastic job in this role, especially being a lead. Other than a guest starring role on a Miami Vice episode, this would be not only his first theatrically released movie where he is Phil Collins, but to be the lead as well is quite an impressive output of acting skills. And it helps to ground his character when he's teamed up with Julie Walters, who in herself is a wonderful woman and does a fantastic job as this doubting wife and mother, just trying to strive to hopefully keep what's good for her family as present as possible. And I would be remiss if I weren't to mention that while the movie is set in the 60s and has a soundtrack that has a dozen 60s songs, the songs Two Hearts and Groovy Kind of Love by Phil Collins basically end this film. The movie ends on Two Hearts while it's playing out, and then the closing credits we get Groovy Kind of Love. Or is it the other way around? Either way, we still get a Phil Collins song in this movie as well. And speaking of song, for that season's Academy Awards, it actually got nominated for Best Original Song. So the big event at the very beginning of the movie practically is the actual Great Train Robbery, which happens on August 8th, 1963, which is about 17 minutes into this 1 hour and 42-minute movie. And as it is the 9th of August, we are going to be watching Empire of the Sun from 1987, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Christian Bale. So to begin with, going into watching this show, I was actually completely convinced that I had actually seen this movie before. But as I was getting more into it, it turned out that I know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. Thanks to shows like Entertainment Tonight at the time, showed a lot of behind the scenes footage of how certain shots were done and how certain locations were built from scratch. And again, a lot of like how it is done sort of thing. Because of being a Spielberg movie and the big budget that was involved with it and the epic story being told as well. So to be fully honest, watching this was my very first time. And like I had mentioned, not only does this movie star Christian Bale, but it also stars John Malkovich, Miranda Richardson, and Nigel Havers. Jamie Graham, played by Christian Bale, a privileged English boy, is living in Shanghai when the Japanese invade and force all foreigners into prison camps. Jamie is captured with an American sailor named Bass, played by John Malkovich, who looks out for him while they are in the camp together. Even though he has been separated from his parents and in a hostile environment, Jamie maintains his dignity and youthful spirits, providing a beacon of hope for the others held captive with him. So I can't go any further into talking about this movie without pointing out the fact that Christian Bale is probably one of the most fantastic actors currently acting. This movie from 1987, he is 12 years old, and it's his first acting job, at least professionally acting job. And he is the core of this movie. The movie is him, and he does such a veteran performance, doing a life's worth of knowledge being put onto the screen for this boy who goes through every single emotion possibly capable of a human having. It is just such a spectacular performance. Now, surround you with a Spielberg-esque epic scope of a World War II drama. We're dealing with prison camps. We're dealing with British prisoners, Japanese soldiers, even like American POWs as well. We're got a spectacular cast. Both the British and American sides are just fantastic. I mean, even the introduction of Basie's partner of Frank, played by Joe Pantoliano, is fantastic. And we even, later on in the movie, have a small little cameo role from, like, of all people, Ben Stiller. And the movie itself is just littered with recognizable names and faces from the creme de la creme, because, hey, you're dealing with Spielberg here. The movie is a interesting juxtaposition, as it's not only like a coming of age film, but it also a war film as well, as both are prevalent as the main line of this story. I mean, the boy has his coming of age during a wartime experience. And while this young boy at the beginning of the movie has to do such a great amount of growing up in such a rushed amount of time under the circumstances, and again, like I mentioned, Christian Bale just does a fabulous job. Of course, he, during filming process, he ages maybe a year, but physically and spiritually, he ages quite a bit. And again, we're dealing with a veteran performance that some people strive their whole entire life to get to. And it is on the 9th of August in 1945 when the the atomic bombing of Nagasaki happens. And that is about 2 hours and 9 minutes into this 2 hour and 32-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up getting nominated for Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Musical Score, Best Costume Design, and Best Sound. And as is the 10th of August, we are watching Beyond Rangoon from 1995, directed by John Borman and starring Patricia Arquette. So, to be completely honest, no idea what this movie was or what it was about. The poster did look familiar when I looked it up, but other than that, I really had no idea what this movie entitled or entailed or had to do with anything. And this would definitely be a first watch for me. And like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Patricia Arquette, but it also stars Frances McDormand, Yu Yang Ku, Johnny Chiha, Adele Lutz, Spalding Gray, Tiara Jaquelina, and Victor Slezak. After the shocking murder of her husband and son, Laura Bowman, played by Patricia Arquette, travels to Burma with her sister Andy, played by Frances McDormand, to find peace. There she witnesses protests against the government and the military's violent response. When Burma enters into military lockdown, Laura loses her passport and is unable to leave the country. A professor, played by Yu Yang Ko, helps her, but this makes her a target for the government as she attempts to reach the border and cross into Thailand. So while watching this movie, I was unaware of the actual events being played out within it. And thankfully, at a portion near the end of the movie, it is pointed out that the Tiananmen Square incident became prevalent in the news cycle at the time, whereas what we were witnessing, which paralleled the exact same moment in time, fell off the radar very quickly. So that would explain why I was unaware of, generally speaking, unaware of what actually happened during this movie. Now, as the emotional center of this movie, where Patricia Arquette has to deal with, first of all, dealing with the loss of her family, which plays throughout the whole entire film. She even has like haunted dreams about her husband and son still being alive at certain points. But it is definitely a through line that drives her. And as she experiences the trauma that goes through being stuck in a area with this military presence closing in on all sides, basically making it impossible for her to get free. Now, the background of Burma and its lakes and waterside villages and all that looks stunningly beautifully, and it's shot very wonderfully as well, taking in the beauty and majesty of the area. But it's definitely not a run-of-the-mill sort of military action movie. We deal with some incidents that go on, and the professor that is helping Laura becomes injured, and she is determined as a not quite doctor because of having a problem mentally to get past that final stage to become a full-fledged doctor. She definitely cares for this gentleman, and the two of them get to a point where she can hopefully find freedom from the state of emergency that the area finds itself in. And using those skills of a doctor, Laura ends up operating on Ko, removing a bullet from his shoulder while they are drifting downriver to get to away from the incidents happening behind them. And it's the next day, which is August 10th, 1988, when the raft stops at a village, and that happens about 53 minutes into this 1 hour and 40-minute movie. And as it is the 11th of August, we are going to be watching Julie and Julia from 2009, directed by Nora Ephron and starring Meryl Streep. So to begin with, it was a very known movie when it was released. Going into the production, the idea behind it and whatnot, the one story being turned into this biography of practically both women and all that sort of thing. And the fact that we have like Meryl Streep doing a fantastic impression of Julia Child, which was all over all the advertisement and whatnot, and then having the wonderful to watch Amy Adams as the secondary character in the movie, which was fantastic. However, that being said, didn't actually watch this movie until this first viewing, so it was quite a fun experience. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star both Meryl Streep and Amy Adams, but it also stars Stanley Tucci, Chris Messina, Linda Imond, Helen Carey, Jane Lynch, and Mary Lynn Rodskip. Frustrated with a soul-killing job, New Yorker Julie Powell, played by Amy Adams, embarks on a daring project where she vows to prepare all 524 recipes in Julia Child's landmark cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. Intertwined with Julie's story is the true life tale of how Julia Child, played by Meryl Streep, herself conquered French cuisine with passion, fearlessness, and plenty of butter. So when you go to watch a movie that you probably should have seen a while ago, and knowing the cast that was involved with it, the story that's involved with it, and just the already set up positive reviews for this movie, you kind of expect to enjoy this movie. And I totally did. This movie was such a delight to watch. To begin with, the impression of Julia Child that Meryl Streep does is fantastic. She's so beautifully teamed up with Stanley Tucci as Paul Child, Julia's husband, and the two of them just have such amazing chemistry together. I mean, these are two very charismatic actors, but to put them together in an actual couple situation is just phenomenal. I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. They have teamed up in other movies, most notably the Devil Wears Prada original and sequel that just recently came out. But them in a actual relationship, a loving relationship, going through this turmoil of becoming the person that Julia Child would later become was just fantastic. And to see the world that Amy Adams' character lives in, and how she does not want to be doing what she's doing. It is definitely destroying her. And the amount of joy she gains from this project that she puts out for herself to complete a whole entire year of recipes and cover all of them from this one particular book. And her husband, played by Chris Messina, playing the Eric Powell to her Julie Powell, are also a great charismatic couple. They are a young couple, and they do have a little bit of turmoil in their relationship, partly responsible for this project that Julie takes on. But again, at the very core of it, it's a very wholesome movie. It's a very entertaining, and it's a very uplifting. Like if you ever feel like the world is getting you down sort of movie, you want to be raised up because you witness not only just one woman, but a second woman overcome her troublesome obstacles to progress to a more enjoyable life. And we do witness this from both. And the movie does a fantastic job of switching back and forth between perspectives. We obviously start off with Julie's story, but then we jump to Julia's story, and back and forth as both women progress in order throughout their lives to a certain end point for both of them. But it's just so well done, and the connection that Julie eventually feels for Julia is not only well earned, but very well executed as well. So it's actually on August 11th, 2002, when Julie starts her blog indicating her intent to prepare all 524 recipes in Julia Child's The Masterpiece of French Cooking in 1 year. And that's at 18 minutes into this 2-hour and 3-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up being nominated for Best Actress for Meryl Streep. And as it is the 12th of August, we are going to be watching Cleopatra from 1963, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz and starring Elizabeth Taylor. Now, I'm pretty sure that anyone watching any sort of movie is well aware of this particular movie. Not only is it the title alone, but the cast and the production and the look of this film, and just the history that is behind the making and distribution of this particular movie. I have seen this movie a very small handful of times. This is one of those movies that definitely has to be seen at least once. However, this is the first time that I am actually seeing the full, longer version of the movie. Previously, only seen the 3 hour and 14-minute version. So this will be technically the first time seeing this version, but I have seen the movie, like I said, about maybe twice prior to this, and it has been quite a while since my last watch. And as I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Elizabeth Taylor, but it also stars Richard Burton, Rex Harrison, Carol O'Connor, Roddy McDowall, Martin Landau, Hume Cronyn, and Andrew Keir. This lengthy, sprawling, spectacular love story depicting Cleopatra's manipulation of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, whereas it's Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra and Rex Harrington as Julius Caesar, where we also then have Richard Burton as Mark Antony in her ill-fated attempt to save the Egyptian Empire. This threesome in one of the most famously and glorious powerful love triangles ever to be captured on film. So that description that I just read is basically the movie in a nutshell. It is a spectacle to watch. This is, again, a couple of the movies that are on this list are those movies that have to be watched. I mean, even if you're not a fan of any of the actors or maybe even the storyline, just the spectacle of seeing how this grand scale movie was just put together is just a mind-blowing thing. And we're dealing with 63, so everything you see is practical. Everything is built from the ground up. The costuming, the set design, the animal wrangling, the hundreds and hundreds of extras that you see in background scenes and whatnot. And again, it is like high echelon movie making of its time, and it shows gloriously on the screen. Now, of course, going into the history of this movie, we are dealing with fantastic actors. The ones that I listed are just like a small portion of recognizable names and voices. Sometimes are what you recognize first before you realize, oh, it's them. But again, this is a epic movie, and its length is long. For this particular viewing, I actually broke this movie into 3 parts. I woke up early to watch as much of it as I could before I had to leave for work. I then, on my lunch break, watched another good 40 minutes of this program, and then was able to come back to cap off the last hour and 40 minutes to finally watch this entire movie. Now, in one sitting, definitely would be a different experience, and of course a portion of it seen on my phone wasn't really the way this movie is supposed to be seen, but because I had seen it prior to this, a lot of it was just more of a refresher of what I hadn't seen. Now, the difference between the version that I had seen prior and the extra version, there is a little more of the storytelling. There is a little more of early Cleopatra. She's introduced in the movie at a certain point, but in this extended version, we have some more sequences where they pre-introduce her than what we see in the full version. Did a quick little research, and it turns out that they originally were going to make 2 movies out of this. They were going to have the Julius Caesar and Cleopatra movie, and then the Mark Antony and Cleopatra movie, and then they were going to be each about 3 hours each. Producers got involved and said, no, it's got to be one, but apparently they did a lot of chopping up just to get it out there. So when this movie originally premiered in 63, it actually was the full 4-hour version. It was then reduced in size for regular distribution. So for a long time, it was just this version that everyone saw. And in comparison, there is not very much different, but if you're paying attention, you will notice it. I mean, first time watch, you're not going to notice a couple of differences. But again, we are dealing with almost 40-ish minutes of extra footage. And again, the coupling of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton shows in every single scene that these two are on screen together. Definitely in a relationship that they were at the time just shows up on the screen beautifully. And like I said, we're dealing with fantastic actors, like Rex Harrington as Julius Caesar does a fantastic job, and several of the other, like I said, names of like Carol O'Connor and Roddy McDowall are just like so fun to watch in a different context than you're used to seeing them in. But again, a very enjoyable movie, no matter which version you're seeing. And it is according to history that after Anthony kills himself, Cleopatra commits suicide on August 12th, 30 BC, when she learns that Octavian, played by previously mentioned Roddy McDowall, plans to drag her back to Rome to grace his triumphal parade. And that actually happens in the extended version at 3 hours and 57 minutes into this 4-hour and 6-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up winning for Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, and Best Visual Effects. And it got nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor for Rex Harrington, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, and Best Sound Mixing. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this particular episode and look off into the future to see what we're going to watch for tomorrow. And that is the 13th of August, and that is Battle of Britain from 1969. So until next time, go see a movie.
This has been A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. Please be sure to subscribe, download, comment, share, rate, and review. Once again, another thanks to Ivan Walters for his book, A Year of Movies, 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Look for it online or at your local bookstore. Follow Planet Geek Productions on all of our social media. Through Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, and Letterboxd, search for Planet Geek Productions. On X, former Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, search for Planet Geek Pod. You can also reach out to us through email at planetgeekpod@gmail.com. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, go see a movie.